All right, those of you who are Coug Connect veterans, welcome. Those of you who are new, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to talk with you about the mind-body connection. This is kind of a 2.0. I had originally done my first presentation in April, and it was the link between physical and mental health. And this is when self-care isn't enough. So my name is Bethany Colaprete. I am the Director for Counseling and Wellness at the College of Veterinary Medicine. Wear a lot of different hats. If you were able to attend the first presentation I did, which was on the link between physical and mental health, here's just some highlights so that it brings some context into what I'm talking about today. There's a strong connection between your mind and body. And there's merging evidence between both the hard and soft sciences to indicate that there's a gut-brain axis. And that's the communication pathway. It's key in solving some of our most complex physical and mental health problems. There's also techniques that can be used and implemented to maximize your overall health. And we addressed those last time. So diaphragmatic breathing is one, mindfulness, progressive muscle relaxation, and cognitive diffusion. So for the purposes of today, I am going to be sharing a fair amount of animal photos and memes, so forgive me because I work for the College of Veterinary Medicine and that is what we do. So I'd like to address the proverbial elephant in the room. Some of us may not be functioning right now at full capacity. So any self-help tips that I offer may be futile. What I do want to talk to you today about is that when self-care isn't enough. So last time I spoke, it was April 23rd. We were a month into quarantine. We were still kind of adapting, trying to figure out how to work from home or, manage our kids or do chores or keeping up with the COVID-19 updates, which were constant. We were just kind of trying to find a balance. So right now, on June 9th, 2020, we've had some major local weather events. We're anticipating budget cuts. We're seeing a lot of societal upheavals. And I say this not to discourage. I say this just to acknowledge that there may be days that are harder than others. So if you're kind of slogging through the mud one day at a time, that's okay. And if there are days that are lighter, that's okay too. So you may be wondering, what's wrong with me? Why can't I focus on my work? Why can't I just do little things around the house? I can kind of hardly get myself out of bed. If that's not you, great. But if that is you, I'm speaking to those of you who this is relevant to. These memes are representative of your current experience. Maybe you're waiting for inspiration to engage in self-care, or maybe you're just kind of making efforts, eating well, exercising, practicing mindfulness, and maybe they just don't seem like it's enough. So it may or may not seem obvious, but it's necessary that we name whatever's happening in order to tame it. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what I mean by that. So name it to tame it is a phrase used by mental health providers. And it's basically talking about identifying emotions or sensations that you're experiencing so that you can process them. So this dog's expression may be one of fear, right? So we might label it fear. And by labeling it, we can identify what we need to do next. So Dr. Daniel Siegel is a clinical professor of psychiatry at the UCLA School of Medicine, and he's a co-founder of Mindful Awareness Research Center. He spent his career looking at the intersections between our mind and body. So he coined the term interpersonal neurobiology. He also coined a term called mind sight. Mind sight is focused attention that allows us to see the internal workings of our minds. It helps us move from autopilot of like those ingrained behaviors and habits that we have to the ability to manage our emotions rather than being overwhelmed by them. So just take, for example, these statements. So I am sad versus I feel sad. the important distinction between these two of I am sad, you know, that tends to sort of define us. It boxes us in, it becomes insular, versus I feel sad suggests the ability to recognize and acknowledge a feeling without being consumed by it. So Dr. Siegel says, the focusing skills that are part of mindsight make it possible to see what is inside, to accept it, and in the accepting, to let it go. And then finally, to transform it. So Dr. Siegel is also a pioneer of a field called interpersonal neurobiology. He incorporates many seemingly disparate fields of study to create a more holistic picture of the human experience. So fields like anthropology, biology, linguistics, mathematics, physics, computer science, psychology, and many others, something that you wouldn't anticipate would correlate. So why am I talking about all this? Because if you're experiencing any emotional ups and downs, and or you're feeling a little bit more anxious than normal or tired, we can name it. If you're not really sure what you're experiencing mentally or emotionally or physically, the important thing is to spend some time trying to figure it out, because when you can identify what it is, we can figure out what to do with it. I want to share a story with you that kind of highlights these points. So I had a client recently. He was talking about how exhausted he was. You know, he was just barely passing his classes. He was talking about just being so consumed by the discord in his family due to a recent family member's death. He mentioned being impacted by the recent news and feeling afraid, and much of the time just sort of sick to his stomach and kept getting these headaches and couldn't figure out why. So I started to kind of talk with him more about his experiences, and what I talked to him about was grief. You know, I educated him on the ways in which grief can manifest, both mentally, emotionally, and physically, and the impact it has on the different areas of a person's life. So he paused and he looked at me and he said, I think that's what I'm going through. So for the rest of the session, we talked about ways to cope with grief and healthy ways to express the emotion. So he said to me later that he wouldn't have thought that kind of what he was going through was grief. But after evaluating it, he was able to realize that grief was exactly what he would describe as his experience. So then we started using tools to process the grief in healthy ways. So, can anybody relate to this? Oh, it's been a ride, right? It's funny. It's a funny way to sum up kind of what we might be feeling. You know, the trepidation, the anxiety, the unrest. So you may notice your heart rate increasing or your quality of sleep deteriorating. Maybe you're a little bit more irritable or sad. Maybe you're angry. So this is important information. All the information you're experiencing, it's important. Because often self-care can be a term that we use as sort of a band-aid, but it can be a way of masking what's really going on inside. So don't get me wrong, you know, taking time for things that fill you up, you know, things that bring you joy and offer peace are necessary to well-being. So you might be doing the right things, eating healthy, taking walks, meditating, and maybe you're still struggling. What I would invite you to do is name it. So what's the struggle? And identify your internal state, because maybe underneath your anger and your fear and sadness is something else. Once you know what the emotion is, you can tame it, meaning you can process the anger, fear, and sadness so it feels more manageable. If you're not really sure what you're feeling, again, spend some time trying to figure it out. It may take some time, but it's a powerful step in a healthy direction. When you incorporate this step, you can start to create integration. And integration is a really important term. There's actually a term called body-mind. Body-mind is an approach to understand the relationship between the human body and mind, where they are seen as a single integrated unit. So the philosophy behind this is that the more you understand the body mind to be one, the easier it is to generate healing and alleviate pain. So there's so much more to this brief overview of the connection between mind and body, but I encourage you to seek out more information. And if you have any questions, I can take them now, or you can leave them in the chat box.